Welcome back to the classes on the overview of the books of the Bible. In this class, we will cover the book of Numbers. As we mentioned in the last class on Leviticus, God spoke to Moses from the tabernacle while Moses stood outside in the beginning of Leviticus. But now, in the beginning of book of Numbers, we see Moses is inside the tabernacle speaking with God. All events of Leviticus happened when Israel was camped around the Mount Sinai, and that took around 1 year. But book of Numbers covers events from the first day of the second month of the second year till almost the 40th year of their journey through the wilderness briefly. In Exodus 12, 1-3 we will read, "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, 'This month is to be for you the first month of the year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight.'" So Israel left Egypt on the 14th day of the first month. In Exodus 19 verse 1 says, "On the first day of the third month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai." So journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai, also known as Horeb, took around 45 days. Deuteronomy 1:2 says it takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir road. So the total journey to the promised land could have been around 56 days, that is less than 2 months. But it took 40 years of journey and the death of 600,000 men to reach the promised land. Why? Because of the rebellion of the people. That is the story that we see in book of Numbers. Of course, as the title of the book is Numbers, that is because we find the statistics of the census of Israel in this book. In Hebrew language, the book is titled Bemidbar, which gets its name from the fifth word of the fifth verse of the book, in the wilderness. The narration of the events in Numbers are those events in the wilderness. The theme of the book is the stubbornness of Israel and God's patience and faithfulness. Book starts with God instructing Moses to take a census in Numbers 1:1-3. The Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting in the desert of Sinai on the first of the second month of the second year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. He said, "Take a census of the whole Israelite community by their clans and families, listing every man by name, one by one. You and Aaron are to count according to their divisions all the men in Israel who are 20 years or old and are able to serve in the army." Exodus 12:37 says the Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Let us see the outline of the book. Chapter 1-4 talks about the nation of Israel and the census. Chapter 5-9 talks about the dedication of the tabernacle. Chapter 10-12 talks about wandering again and quail and grumbling and rebelling. Chapter 13 and 14 talks about the exploration of Canaan, the bad and good report. And chapter 15 talks about more laws, and 16 and 17 talks about Korah's rebellion, and 18 and 19 talks about more laws again. Chapter 20 talks about Moses striking the rock, and so that he will not enter the promised land, and the death of Aaron. Chapter 21 talks about the rebellion, the bronze snake, the defeat of the Amorites. Chapter 22-25 talks about Balaam and the speaking donkey, and the Israelites falls into idolatry. Chapter 26-30 talks about various laws and how Joshua succeeds Moses. And 31-37 talks about the victory in the east of the Jordan and the war with Midian. And we know that Reuben and Gad stay east of Jordan and the division of the land. Again and again, the people were unfaithful and God disciplined them, but again and again, Moses the prefigure of the Messiah, intervened for the people to ask for God's mercy. There are 2 censuses taken in 40 years of their journey. The first one was in the 2nd year, and the second census was probably by the 40th year. See the first census in Numbers 1, 45 and 46. So all the Israelites 20 years of age or older who could serve in Israel's army were counted according to their families. And all those counted total 6,03,550. Now see the second census 38 years later in Numbers 26:51. These men of Israel numbered 6,01,730 in all. In the first census, Israel counted 6,03,550 men ready for war. 38 years later, they counted 6,01,730 men, a loss of 1,820 men. Why there is no growth in the number for 40 years? Numbers 26, 64 and 65 says, among all these, however, there was not one man who had been numbered by Moses and Aaron the priest when they counted the Israelites in the wilderness of Sinai, for the Lord had told them that they would surely die in the wilderness. Not one was left except Caleb son of Jephunneh and Joshua son of Nun. What made God so angry to make sure that all men die in the wilderness? That is a big story covered in book of Numbers. In Numbers 13 we see Moses sending out 12 spies to spy out the promised land and bring back a report. They spied the land for 40 days and see what the report they brought back. Numbers 13, 25 to 33. After 40 days, the men returned from spying out the land and they went back to Moses, Aaron, and the whole congregation of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back a report for the whole congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they gave this account to Moses. We went into the land to which you sent us, and indeed it is flowing with milk and honey. Here is some of its fruit. Nevertheless, the people living in the land are strong, and the cities are large and fortified. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the land of Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and the Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live by the sea and along the Jordan. Verse 30. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we must go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly conquer it. But the men who had gone up with him replied, we cannot go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they gave the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had spied out. The land we explored devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw there are great in stature. We even saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak that come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own sight, and we must have seemed the same to them. The faithless bad report of the 10 spies brought so much fear in the rest of Israel. They grumbled against God and Moses. Numbers 14 verse 4 says, so they said to one another, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. They wanted to return to Egypt by appointing another leader in place of Moses. Remember how terrible was their lives as slaves in Egypt. Now they want to go back to slavery when God is fulfilling his promises and is taking them to the promised land. This is basic human nature. God calls us to have faith and put our trust in him and his wonderful plans for us. But we can't see the future that God is promising. We are living by the realities of the present, and when those realities are hard for us, we want to break free from God and find our own way. Is the book of Numbers just telling the story of those Israelites or our own story? Isn't it the same way we are often tempted to respond to God? How did faithful people, Joshua and Caleb, respond to the outcry of the faithless people? Numbers 14, 6-12 says that Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to the whole congregation of Israel, "The land we pass through and explore is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and He will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, for they will be like bread for us. Their protection has been removed, and the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." But the whole congregation threatened to stone Joshua and Caleb. Then the glory of God appeared to all the Israelites in the tent of meeting. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long they refuse to believe in me, despite all the signs I have performed among them? I will strike them with a plague and destroy them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they are." We see there is a huge risk in being faithful to God. You can be stoned and rejected, and you won't be popular for sure. But see how Joshua and Caleb risked their lives and stood their ground for glorifying God. How did God respond to that rebellion? He spoke to Moses in verse 12. "I will strike them with a plague and destroy them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they are." How did Moses respond to that? Moses pleaded with God to forgive them. Verse 19, "Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of the people, in keeping with the greatness of your loving devotion, just as you have forgiven them ever since they left Egypt." Moses pleads with God for their forgiveness. Read verses 20-24. "I have pardoned them as you requested," the Lord replied. "Yet as surely as I live, and as surely as the whole earth is filled with the glory of God, not one of the men who have seen my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have tested me and disobeyed me these 10 times. Not one will ever see the land that I swore to give their forefathers. None of those who have treated me with contempt will see it. But because my servant Caleb had a different spirit and has followed me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he has entered, and his descendants will inherit it." Now we see here, God listens to the request of Moses and decided not to destroy all of them, but He will discipline those who were faithless. What can we learn from all this? Are you willing to have a different spirit than the majority who are often faithless and rebellious to God? What happened to those who rebelled against God? All of them perished in the wilderness. Among those adults who left Egypt, only Joshua and Caleb made it to the promised land. So why these stories are written in the Old Testament, and why should we read them? Apostle Paul has an answer in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Let's read 1 Corinthians 10, 1-30. "For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were under the cloud and that they passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test Christ as some of them did, and were killed by the snakes. And do not grumble as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So, If you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide you a way out so that you can endure it. Verse 11 says, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So verse 12 says, so if you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Book of Numbers and all those stories of rebellion of people and God's dealing with them are written down for us as a warning. Do you see the book of Numbers is so relevant for us today and for the generations to come in the future? Another major event mentioned that we should have a look at is the disobedience of Moses himself. Israel again grumbled when there was no water, and God told Moses to go and speak to a rock. But see what Moses did in Numbers 20, 11 and 12. Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and all the livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. Bible teaches us, in your anger do not sin. But Moses failed here. He was angry with the rebellion of the people. That was right for him to be angry, but he sinned in that anger. Instead of speaking to the rock as God commanded, he struck the rock twice. And of course the water gushed out and more than 1 million people were satisfied. But one and only person is angry with that action. God himself. Why was God so angry? Because he says here, because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. Remember what we understood about the book of Leviticus. God was teaching how holy he is and how to treat the holy God with reverence. Moses failed to honor or revere God as holy in the sight of Israelites, and so the judgment was that he will not enter the promised land. We see how God does not show partiality. He disciplines not only the sheep but also the shepherd with the same standard. In fact, those who teach or lead will be judged even more strictly. On the other hand, we see another person in a similar situation responded differently and got the favorable attention of God. In Numbers 25, 1-9. While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meat and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. The Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of these people, kill them and expose them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the Lord's fierce anger may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to Israel's judges, each of you must put to death those of your people who have yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor. Then an Israelite man brought into the camp a Midianite woman right before the eyes of Moses and the whole assembly of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and followed the Israelite into the tent. He drove the spear into both of them, right through the Israelite man and into the woman's stomach. Then the plague against the Israelites was stopped. But those who died in the plague numbered 24,000. Midianites tried to hire Balaam to curse Israel, but he could only bless Israel. So they found another way to bring curses upon Israel, and that worked partially. They got their women to seduce Israelite men into sexual immorality and also to worship their idols. This angered God so much that he wanted the judges of Israel to put to death those who have become sinful. See the urgency that Phinehas felt about obeying God's word, even though it was a tough command. See how God responded to it. Verse 10 to 13 says, the Lord said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, has turned my anger away from the Israelites. Since he was as zealous for my honor among them as I am, I did not put an end to them in my zeal. Therefore, tell him I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant of lasting priesthood because he was zealous for me, because he was zealous for the honor of his God and made atonement for the Israelites. Not only Phinehas was honored by God with a covenant of blessing with him, but also God's wrath was turned away and the rest of Israel was saved. What was most pleasing to God? Listen to God's own words. He says, he was as zealous for my honor among them as I am. See, when we seek our own honor or respect, we get angry with the people when they dishonor us. But we don't care if they dishonor God. But when we seek the honor of God, we can't bear with anyone dishonors God, and we will act on it. And God will be pleased with us. This is what was missing in the action of Moses one time. However faithful we are, we have a chance to fail like Moses. But we are called to imitate the good example of Phinehas to seek the honor of God through instant obedience to God. It might be helpful for us to know the structure of the tabernacle and the significance of the items in it. The tabernacle of Moses was a tiny replica of heaven and the throne of God. God's presence was with Israel throughout their journey from Egypt to the promised land. It was as if he dwelt in a tent with them. Their tents were around the tabernacle. So the tabernacle was at the center of their camp. God has to be the center of our lives, our families, and the society. Tabernacle was covered by 4 coverings. The first was made of fine linen, second was God's hair, third ram skin, and the fourth was sea-cow hides. Main tabernacle was divided into 2 main portions. The holy place, which had a dimension of 30 by 15 by 15 feet. And the most holy place with a dimension of 15 by 15 by 15 feet. Holy place had only 3 items of furniture. Table for the bread of the presence, altar of incense, and a menorah or a gold lamp. Most holy place had only one thing in it, the Ark of the Covenant. Notice there was no lamp inside the most holy place. So how there was light? The glory of God filled it and lit it. Numbers 7:89 says, when Moses entered the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, he heard a voice speaking to him from between the 2 cherubim above the atonement cover in the Ark of the Covenant law. In this way, the Lord spoke to him. That part of the Ark of the Covenant is called the mercy seat. That was the most important part of the tabernacle. Holy and most holy place were separated by a curtain, and cherubim were woven on the curtain. Just as cherubim kept Adam and Eve away from reaching out to the tree of life, this symbolizes that no man should enter the most holy place into the presence of God. So cherubim woven on the curtain symbolize that people were kept away from reaching out to the throne of grace. But something supernatural happened at the time of the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. Matthew 27:50 and 51 says, and when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. What does that signify? Through the last and final sacrifice, the sacrifice of the precious blood of the Son of God, Jesus, not in an earthly tent that was just a replica of heaven, but as Jesus offered his own unblemished blood as an atoning sacrifice for all mankind once for all, the throne of God is opened for mankind. Hebrews 9:11 and 12 says, but when Christ came as a high priest of the good things that are now already here, as he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands, that is to say, he is not a part of this creation. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. What a blessing is this, brothers and sisters. All this law, the offerings and the sacrifices and the tabernacle were leading to this one event. God is holy forever and ever, but unholy people like us who were separated from that holy God has a hope now. Hebrews 4:14 to 16 says, "Therefore, since we have a high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." So where is the tabernacle now? 1 Corinthians 6:19 to 20 says, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, glorify God with your body." In Exodus and Leviticus and even Numbers, we see God coming to dwell among the people. Then, at the right time, Jesus, who is God, came in flesh and dwelt among the people. After his death and resurrection, he has come to dwell within our physical bodies in spirit, so that his presence is with us 24/7. He is communicating to us and directing us to live a holy life. What a blessing is that? Aren't we more blessed than all those who lived in the time before Jesus? Do you appreciate that? How do you treat this blessing? Are we grateful, and are we offering our bodies as living sacrifices to God? Through Book of Numbers, we learn how important it is to trust God and his wonderful plans and to live a life of reverence and submission. Consider the narratives as a warning for us so that we learn to be different from the rebellious Israel and be like Jesus. Therefore, glorify God with your body, which has become the temple of God. Amen. To God be the glory.